Okay, guys. The title of this talk, when it was written, I made a mistake. I wrote the 3 steps to joy or 3 steps to true joy, something along those lines. And it was supposed to be based on the mitzvot that we have for Purim. But of course, I remember that there's 4 mitzvot to Purim. So the talk is going to be the 4 steps to joy. What's the idea? Purim is the culmination of the month of joy, right? Adar is the month of joy. So I would assume that the 4 mitzvot that we have for Purim must be mitzvot that can help us increase in joy. This is supposed to be a very joyful day, very exciting day. So I would assume it's going to be a day of a lot of joy. So first we'll start off with a little anecdote. The first Jewish president of the United States of America. He's elected to the White House and he's very excited. Why is he very excited? Because really, what's the culmination of everything that he's done? He's going to invite his mother to the White House. His mother's going to come. She's going to see so much nachas. Look at my son. He's in the White House. This is my little yingla. Amazing. He calls up his mother and he says, Ma, it's going to be Purim. We're going to do Purim in the White House. You're invited to come and stay with me in the White House. She says, Yankele, I'm going to have to get on a plane. I'm going to have to go and stand in line for baggage. I don't want to do this. He says, Ma, I'm the president. I'm going to send you Air Force One, limousine, full, no traffic. You're going to go through, you're going to get the works. He says, I'm going to have to pack my bags. I'm going to forget something. I'm going to forget this, forget that. She's all stressed. She says, Ma, it's going to be amazing. She says, fine, you know what? I'll come. She calls up her friend right afterwards and she says, Susie, you're not going to believe this. I'm going to spend Purim with my son. And she says, really, the doctor? And she says, nah, the other one. So, for Purim, the first mitzvah that we have for Purim is Mikra Megillah, okay? Now, the basic idea of the Megillah, the reason why we have the mitzvah is to publicize what happened, right? We need to know the story. But I would say even a little bit deeper than that, it's not just to publicize what happened to the world, but it's for us to know the story, for us to realize who we are. I don't know if anyone here has ever seen The Lion King. It's one of my favorite movies. But if you see The Lion King, you realize what's the whole story, that Simba grows up, his father is killed, and then he loses his way. He's brought into the jungle and he meets this, I don't know what is Timon. Timon is a mole rat or something. And he meets Pumbaa and he decides to be Hakuna Matata. And he leaves the palace and he wants to be Hakuna Matata in the jungle. He's having a good time. They're eating bugs. Fantastic. What happens? He comes into the field and his father appears to him in a vision. And he said, Simba, remember who you are. And this is the key. Number one, before we could have any joy, we need to know who we are and where we stand. And we see this in the world today very much, that people respect people who respect themselves. If you don't stand for something and you're wishy-washy, oh, this, oh, that, oh, this, that, and you don't know where you are, the world today will run you over like a steamroller in a second. A person today, especially us as Jewish people, we need to have complete clarity in who we are, what are our values, not based on what anybody else says, and where we stand. So I want to share with you a story to illustrate this point. In Hungary, during World War II, they were, I believe, one of the last countries to be attacked by Hitler and the Nazis, Yamach Shema. May their memory be erased. And there was a young couple, a young woman, who gave birth to a little baby girl in the hospital in Hungary. And this girl, she was beautiful. She had blue eyes, blonde hair, gorgeous little baby. And the nurse brings the baby to the mother. And the nurse is holding the baby. She looks like a very stern, angry lady. And the woman says, oh, give me my baby. You know, it's this weird, I don't know why it happens in hospitals. I'm sure there's a reason for it. And I'm sure there's medical reasons. But seemingly they take the baby, usually, and they give the baby back. So the mother's so excited. They're bringing the baby. She's like, oh, give me the baby, give me the baby. And the nurse throws the baby at the foot of the bed. And she says, I don't even know why we're wasting our time with these Jews. Hitler's going to be here in a few months, a few years. He's going to kill them anyway. What are they taking up beds in our hospital? Why are we wasting time on them? So obviously, you can imagine a young mother giving birth to her first child, quite traumatic. She takes the baby and holds it in her arms. And she thinks, what's she going to name the baby? And she realizes that the baby is born on Purim. So she says, I'm going to name the baby Esther Hamalka. That's going to be the baby's name, this little girl. The woman sitting next to her in the bed, not a woman who gave birth, a woman who was in the hospital for a different reason. She looks over and says, oh my gosh, what a beautiful baby. This baby had big blue eyes. She said, what a gorgeous baby. Wow, so cute, so amazing. What's your name? She says, oh, Mrs. Rosenberg. Says, Mrs. Rosenberg, let me tell you something. The Nazis, God forbid, they're going to come and they're going to put your family in danger. Give the baby to me. I'll protect the baby. I don't have any children of my own. I'll take the baby as my own. I'll protect the baby. And the mother, she just gave birth. She looks, are you crazy? She holds her baby tight. She says, you're not going to take her. No one's going to take her. The baby's going to stay with me. And her husband comes in with a Megillah. He has a little grogger, a little Purim, and they're happy. They go back home. And sure enough, they're put into a ghetto. And they grow up in the ghetto for a few years. This little girl, Esther, they called her Estherke. Estherke, she grows up. She's a cute, happy, spunky, full of life little girl. And her parents are over the moon. They're in love. It doesn't matter what's going on in the rest of the world. This girl, Estherke, is the light of their life. But they realize when she's turning about 3 years old, they realize that it's time to send her away. It's time to hide her. And they realize that the Nazis are coming close enough that it's getting serious. They can't continue to live in their bubble. They need to take action before, they need to be proactive instead of being reactive. So what do they decide? They're going to send Estherke to a faraway little farm in a very poor countryside that hopefully the Germans won't take notice of. And she'll hide there until they can get back and get her. So what do? They made sure that this Purim was the best Purim of her life. Now, who did she dress up as? Like Rabbi Weiss was saying, she dressed up as Esther Hamalka. And her mother made sure that her hair was gorgeous. She had a little crown and she wore a beautiful little dress. And she was the happiest. She had no idea. She was the happiest little girl in the world. Walking around, the people, everyone would look at her and they were so, because they knew what was happening and they knew what was going on in the world. But this girl had no idea. She was happy, smiley, dancing, celebrating everything. That night, the last night, her mother put her to bed. She gave her a kiss, and the girl said, I'm so lucky to be Esther Amalka. I love my name, Estherke. She says, I'm little Esther. And she realized that she dressed up as her name. She was so happy. The next morning, they had this boy take her to the place where she was going to be. So the mother bends down and says, Estherke, listen to me very clearly. From now on, your name is Ava. If anybody asks you, you are Ava. And you're going to go with this boy. He's a great boy. He's a very nice man. And you're going to have a good life. And sure enough, very soon, Tati and Mommy are going to see you again, and there's nothing to worry about. That's what he tells her daughter. And the daughter, obviously, little 3-year-old girl, she starts to get agitated. She's like, what are you talking about? What are you saying? I'm going to stay with Tati and Mommy. We said, Purim, everything is so good. And she said, no. Now you're Ava. This is what's going to happen. And this is what you need to do. And the boy, who also blue-eyed, blonde hair, bends down and speaks to her in Yiddish. And she says, Ava, listen to me very closely. Every night, you're going to say Shema Yisrael, and you're going to remember, you're going to think of your Tati and Mommy, and you're going to say, I'm Esther Amalka, but during the day, you're Ava. That's what you're going to do, and you're going to come with me. That's what they do. And sure enough, Baruch Hashem, thank God, the mother, the father, the Tati and Mommy, they went through the war, and they both survived. And they came back to get their daughter. They came back to the countryside. Sure enough, they come to the little village. They come to the house, and they're walking around. They made a plan. They said like this, when we see her, we don't want to traumatize her. What we're going to do is we're going to break it in very slowly. We're going to come to her. We're going to say, oh, we're going to pretend like we don't know her. And slowly, we'll remind her who she is. They come to a house, and they see a little girl playing in the front yard. She's barefoot. She's tan. He looks up, and they see her big blue eyes. And they get so excited. But they said, okay, we're going to stay calm, whatever. And they go over to the girl sitting outside in the front yard, and they say, hi. Say, what's your name? She says, my name is Ava. Say, oh, Ava, such a pretty name. This is our name, whatever. And the girl gets all uncomfortable. The stranger is stopping at her, talking to her in the front yard. She runs up and runs inside. She says, mommy. She runs inside the house. She comes to the front door, and there's this farmer woman standing there, and is holding her hand. And she sees the parents standing there, and the mother sees that the woman holds the girl's hand very tight. She squeezes her hand. So the mother couldn't help herself anymore, and she screamed out, Estherke, come here. And the little girl, as if she was woken up from a trance, as if she was in this daze, for years. All of a sudden, her eyes, she started bulging and she ripped her hand away from the woman and she ran back to her parents. So this idea of remembering through all the challenges who we are is a key importance, not just to be joyful, but to be understanding, to be able to go through this life. There's so many people that they can live their entire life and they don't know who they are. And it can be one of the worst. It's not something, sometimes you'll see, I've met a few young people where they feel like it's the most amazing thing. We go to Hawaii, we go to India, and we don't know who we are. We're discovering ourselves. We're floating. We're floating in the world. It's not a good place to be. It's the worst place to be. To understand and remember who we are and what we stand for. The second mitzvah of Purim is the mitzvah of the Seudah, right? To have a feast. So when you talk about bringing joy, that one makes a lot of sense. It's very self-explanatory. So first, let's talk for a second why we do the Seudah. So actually it says that the whole reason why we came to Purim in the first place, why was there a decree? Why did God make it that we should be put into a position where there's a decree on our heads where 127 countries want to kill or eradicate all the Jews of their lands? So it says that the Jewish people, we were invited to the feast of Achashverosh. And Achashverosh had all the kalim from the Beit HaMikdash. And Achashverosh's feast was an epic party of proportions that we don't understand today. I saw actually on the news there was some Indian billionaire who got married. It looked like maybe that was a little bit of what Achashverosh's feast. That's what it looked like, a little flavor, a taste. But the Jewish people, we came to the feast. And that makes sense. And there's nothing wrong with going to the feast of a king, especially of 127 countries. We need to be connected to the politicians and the mayors and the governors and the presidents. That's very important. But what does it say? Is that we thought that our fate was in the hands of Achashverosh. And that little switch, that little tiny switch is the biggest switch in the world, especially when it comes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. To realize that our survival always is in God's hands. Now, what does that mean? That means that we don't just sit down and wait for a cloud to come down and make a miracle. We need to make it happen, but to realize that it's all from Hashem. And that's why the whole story came out to be in the first place. And then we see multiple feasts throughout the story. Like the rabbis were mentioning, that you have Esther, she had the feast with Ahasuerus and Haman. She kept making another feast until she was ready to bust the big question. And now today, we celebrate by making a feast. And then the Vilna Gaon, the Gra, actually says the reason why we make a Seudah is actually to commemorate that feast that Esther made for Ahasuerus and Haman. But a very interesting line it says in the Zohar, that it says that on Purim, we have the power and we have the ability to affect the same changes in the heavenly spheres that we do by fasting on Yom Kippur, by eating on Purim. Okay? Which means that by making a Seudah on Purim, sometimes we have it as the Seudah on Purim, it's like, okay, it's a regular day. It's not a day that it's a Chag. We're able to do work, we're able to drive, use electricity. And the Seudah is a nice thing. The Seudah on Purim, to be able to break through the boundaries of the world with joy, that is the most powerful thing. And there's actually a whole little, which I didn't prepare for this, so I don't know the backstory to it, where it says Yom Kippur is Yom Kippurim. It's like Purim, but Purim is the holiest day. Because to break through the heavenly spheres with joy, that is the most powerful thing. And sometimes we have in our minds, and you see in the story of Purim itself, that in order to reach God, we have to fast. We have to hurt ourselves. We need to break ourselves and beg Hashem for help and mercy. But over here we say, no. On Purim, it's with joy and celebration. That's what's going to make the biggest difference. And this is very important. Because like I was saying in the first part, to know who we are. I saw there was a debate of this Purim, should we detract? Should we do something a little bit less because of the situation of the Jewish people? Because the Chaylim are fighting, because of the news that we're receiving that seems to be every day devastating. So seemingly this Purim, we should all do, because we're sitting here, we should all do a little bit less. The Seudah should be a little bit less dancing, a little bit less jovial. Maybe we should be not running around in costumes and being all, because people could look at us and ourselves and say, it looks idiotic, it looks insensitive. We're running around dancing and celebrating while there's soldiers fighting. How does that make any sense? But we say no. And that's why when we go back to the first part, to know who we are, we need to understand what we are doing. That might make sense. That might be logical. It might be our first human knee-jerk reaction, but that is not the truth. When it comes to Purim, it is with joy that is going, it's a simcha poretz keder. It is with joy and celebration that is going to break all the boundaries. It is with this year, not just so there be not less joy, there should be more and more and more joy, as much joy as possible. It should be a joy like we never had before because we never were faced with this. Actually, we're talking about this past Sudat Shlishit. I was speaking about Itai Chen, who tonight is dedicated to. To me, on a personal level, I never met Itai before. But when I was younger, growing up in Chabad Yeshivot, there was this is a whole side story not going to get into now, but I remember there was a guy who was a big figure that Chabad was trying to release from prison because he felt it wasn't right. He actually is related to a family member of mine. His name is Shalom Mordechai Rabashkin. And he was a big figure, and we said Tehillim for him, and we davened for him. We wanted him to come out of prison. Whatever he did doesn't matter, but we said it's not right for him to sit in prison, especially I think it was 27 years or something he was sentenced to. And sure enough, I came into yeshiva one day, and the Mendel of the yeshiva comes in, and he says, he's out, and everybody got up, and it was like a celebration. I remember I was in Brooklyn, New York, when he was released. It was a celebration like you cannot imagine. I will never forget that. I've been Simchas Torah and these big shows and this Purim, that. This was a celebration like it was unbelievable, and Jews from all stripes and colors came together. It wasn't like Chabad came and packed 770. People came in from all over the place, from Muncie and Flatbush and Borough Park. It was the biggest mix and happiest mix of Jews I've ever seen in my life. So in the beginning of this war, Itai's brother had a bar mitzvah. And I went, even though I didn't know, I just knew there was a bar mitzvah, and it was going to be, they were doing in the Chabad, it was going to be like a unity kiddush, and I went. And I remember thinking to myself, this is exactly, like I literally was like, for sure, we're going to be in the piano, it's going to be so many people, we're not going to be able to fit into any building. We're going to be in the piano, just the whole neighborhood's going to come out, we're going to be flooding and dancing. And this past week, the news was like, it was like getting hit by, it was totally, meaning throughout the war, there's been bad news, some good days, some bad days. This was like the worst news personally. Can't compare it to anything else, but I just was shocked. I was like, there's no way. Itai was like the symbol of our community. He was the symbol of hope, the symbol of who's going to come home. Every time they were talking about a hostage release, I was like, it's going to be Itai, and we're going to be dancing. It's going to be so amazing for the community, such a pick-me-up for everyone. And it was not. So what do we do now when it comes to Purim? Is we need to be strong. We do not have the luxury of saying that we're going to surrender. We don't have the luxury of saying that now, you know what, that's it. Now we give up. Because that was our hope. Think of all the generations of Jewish people that are counting on us to get it done today. And I realized for myself growing up, every time we would hear different stories of Jewish history, I always felt it was so foreign to me. Like, oh, this war and this Holocaust and this pogrom and this Inquisition. I grew up in Miami, Florida. Okay, there was no pogroms, Baruch Hashem. There was no Inquisitions. There was no Holocaust. And every time I hear stories, I'd be like, wow, amazing, Mr. Nefesh. But I'm like, I don't see that at all. I walk in the street. I remember growing up in Miami. We grew up in Surfside. We didn't even lock our doors ever. Our door was never locked. To the point there was even a whole story. What? Buildings falling down, but the door wasn't locked. I even by point, my little brother, there's a whole story, but the door was never locked. And I never understood these stories. And all of a sudden today, I think it's taking us time, even from the beginning, even when we say it, it's taking us time to process this, but this is our time. When it comes to a generation where we're faced, when they say, they're coming to destroy us in every generation, and we read that and we're like, okay, yeah, but we're in Miami, doesn't seem nobody's coming to destroy us here, it's fantastic. But all of a sudden it comes to today, and every Jew needs to realize this is the call. This is the time where we say, you must stand strong. The previous generations of all the Bubbies and Zaydis before us that gave everything to keep us going, to say now we're going to give up, it's not a choice. It's not a choice. And it's not a choice when you talk about speaking to your spouse or speaking to your friend today. Could you face the Bubbies and Zaydis of all the generations before us and everything they've done to bring us here and say, okay, now we had enough. Now we came from America, or we came from the United Kingdom or Canada, South Africa. This is too much for me. I'm not ready for this. I'm done. I'm out. We don't have the choice. We need to stay strong. And that brings us to the third mitzvah. The third mitzvah is Mishloach Manot, which is so fascinating because it's a mitzvah which is not, meaning we know because we have two of them, it's so clear the difference. It is not about giving to a poor person, it's about giving to a peer, which is so fascinating because there actually was a study which unfortunately was from Harvard. And I know Harvard today, a little bit of a curse word, but it's a study from Harvard that they conducted from 1938, where they did a study to try and discover which jobs are the happiest jobs, which basically was a study on how does a person live a happy life. They were doing it based on a job, but really they were seeing what makes people tick, what makes people wake up in the morning excited and happy and feeling fulfilled. And they discovered from 1938 until today, it's the longest running study of its kind. They discovered that the happiest jobs have nothing to do with finances of who gets paid the most. It has nothing to do with prestige. It has to do with co-working. Whichever jobs have social co-working, where a person comes to work and they have friends and they have parties and they're together and there's a social aspect to it, those are the happiest people. And they actually, this study was very precise. Every 2 years, they would ask people these questions, that question to try to get. This was number one by far. And it actually speaks about also in regards to a person aging, that 50% it lowers the mortality rate of a person if they have a strong community around them, a strong family, strong relationships. So Mishloach Manot, we always talk about how people understand, oh, it's easy when we say love your fellow Jew, it's easy to love the guy who lives in a different country. But to love the guy who's my neighbor I don't like so much. My neighbor I can't, my peer, not so much. But Mishloach Manot is saying, no. To love the guy sitting next to you, to love the guy who's your peer, maybe he's your competition, maybe you feel threatened by him, maybe it's harder for you. But Mishloach Manot is saying, go and give a meal to another person. Not to a poor person where you feel like, oh, you feel so good because, yeah, poor person, wow, look at me, I'm a philanthropist, I help this guy. No. Give a meal as a gift to another person. And sometimes with Mishloach Manot, people are very careless with it because they say, oh, I'm giving it to someone, it's not someone who really needs it, okay? Maybe he's getting, and I know he's getting 10 Mishloach Manot, so I don't have to put in that candy or that bottle of wine. I'll make it a simple one. It's no. When you give this Mishloach Manot to another person with a smile, a nice Mishloach Manot, putting in the effort to make someone else who is your peer to be happy and to have that relationship and that connection. And in order for us to stay strong and to be joyful, we must be together. If we are not together, that's it. We have nothing. And the fourth mitzvah is matanot le'avyonim, to give money, to give gifts to the poor. And it's very interesting because it actually speaks about, you say matanot le'avyonim, it's not just giving to the poor, it's giving a gift. What's the idea of a gift? Is you put some thought into it. It actually speaks about how when it comes to giving to a poor person, it's greater if the person puts thought, not just that they give, but they think, what does the person need, right? Like it's better instead of giving someone a fish to teach them how to fish. Because I think it's a Chinese or a Japanese saying, but it's a good saying nonetheless. And it's really, no, nothing against wonderful people, like wonderful people, all my best friends. But but to give to the poor. We'll end off with a story like this. There was in Muncie, there was a guy named David Birnbaum, and he was driving a truck, and he was turning the corner, and he did not see a little girl. He did not see Surrey Brick. Surrey Brick was crossing the street. I'm not sure exactly what she was doing, and his truck hit her, and he called Hatzalah right away. And sure enough, Hatzalah comes. The Hatzalah volunteer who came was Judah Hoffman. Judah Hoffman comes within a minute. He was there, picks up the girl. Within 17 minutes, he has her in the hospital. They did multiple operations on her, and sure enough, she was taken care of. She had 2 broken legs, but Baruch Hashem, she was going to be fine, make a full recovery, Baruch Hashem. Sure enough, that night, he can't sleep. Because, a simple guy, he's not like a big surgeon who deals. There was a little girl who was hit by a car. He couldn't sleep, and it was bothering him. He's thinking about it so much. And he's reminding himself, why did he become a Hatzalah volunteer in the first place? How did he become inspired to be a Hatzalah volunteer? What happened? He was a little boy in Flatbush, and he was hit by a truck. What happened? A woman came out into the street, and she found him sitting there, and she brought this guy whose name was Dr. Marvin Bess. Dr. Marvin Bess came down. He evaluated the boy. They brought him to the hospital. He was saved. And he's thinking, what's bothering him? He can't remember the name of the woman. What was the woman's name? The woman's name was Miriam Brick. And he's thinking to himself, Miriam Brick, Surrey Brick, there's got to be some sort of Miriam. And he looks into it, and sure enough, Surrey Brick is Miriam Brick's granddaughter. So we see this idea when it comes to giving to another person, what comes around goes around. It's actually a beautiful little anecdote that I saw, that the word v'natnu is a palindrome. right? That you could spell it both ways. Why? Because it comes around. V'natnu, vav nun taf nun vav. I feel like if Ruby was here, he would help me with this to explain. They give it. What comes around goes around. When you give to another person, it comes back to you. That's not the reason to give, but it's to know that it's part of our society. When we give, we thrive all together. So l'chaim, God willing, we will see through the joy of Purim. Oh, this is not my cup. Through the joy of Purim, that we will be together. We will celebrate. We will have joy like we have never had before, even though it will be hard. And by the way, meaning a lot of times we have to be politically correct where we go around the joyful. I have to be like, listen, I'm only joyful because it's Purim. I'm not actually joyful. I'm really sad, but I'm trying my best. Everyone knows everyone's having a hard time. We don't have to explain anything. Everyone is having a difficult time during this war. But if we stand together on Purim, we are joyful, we are strong together. God willing, with this joy, we will be victorious. We will come to the final redemption, to the Geula Amitit Vashlema, very soon, speedily in our days. L'chaim.